Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are wading into some pretty charged territory. We're looking at two big global trends happening at the same time, both sped up by globalization.
Yeah, we're talking about the rise in non-natal species, introductions, biological invasions, and also the increase in human migration.
And these two things are definitely linked. I mean, human movement often brings species along for the ride.
Absolutely. But the real issue, and why we're focusing on this today, is the language, the way politicians and sometimes the media talk about it.
You mean borrowing terms from invasion science?
Exactly. Words like alien, infest, and the big one, invasion, they get taken from ecology and slapped onto human migration.
And it's not accidental. It fuels a certain kind of, well, xenophobic sentiment, doesn't it?
It really does. When you hear talk of a migrant invasion, it's meant to sound like a biological threat, like people are somehow pests.
The researchers we're discussing today point out this isn't new at all. They trace it back, like in the U.S., to things like that 1873 Chinese invasion ad.
Yeah, which directly fed into the Chinese Exclusion Act. It's an old playbook, sadly. Dehumanize migrants by comparing them to ecological problems.
So that brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We're looking at a major review paper.
That's right, it's published in Biological Reviews. The lead author is Danish Ahmed, working with a really large, diverse team of researchers.
And their goal was essentially to map out the parallels, scientifically speaking, between these two types of movement.
Yes, but maybe even more importantly, to clearly define the very real ethical and biological differences that separate them. The walls, so to speak.
Right. So that's our mission for this discussion. Explore those surface similarities the paper talks about, because they are there, but really spend time on the fundamental non-negotiable differences.
We need to bring in the history, the social context, the ethics.
Exactly. To show why getting the policy right, treating these phenomena separately and appropriately, isn't just politics. It's a scientific and moral necessity. Okay, let's unpack the paper itself then. It wasn't new field research, right? It was review.
Correct. A massive transdisciplinary review. They pulled together knowledge from invasion science, migration studies, sociology, history, a whole range of fields.
And what's the sort of headline finding, the main caution?
The core message is a really strong warning. It says, look, yes, human movement is a major driver, a vector for biological invasions. We carry species, intentionally or not.
Okay, that link is clear.
But, and this is the crucial part, trying to use concepts from invasion biology to understand or manage human migration is incredibly risky. It leads to dangerous oversimplification.
Oversimplification that ignores what exactly?
It ignores basic human rights, individual agency, culture, social dynamics. The paper stresses that while both might involve stages like movement, establishment, spread, the underlying contexts, especially the philosophical and social ones, are fundamentally different.
Okay. But let's get into those similarities they did identify, because that's where the comparison often starts, right?
Yeah.
What makes it seem plausible on the surface?
Well, one big area is the shared mechanics of how movement starts. Think about push-pull dynamics.
Right? Standard in migration studies. People are pushed out by things like war, poverty, environmental disaster.
And pulled towards places with, say, economic opportunity, safety, family reunification.
And how does that mirror ecology?
It's quite direct conceptually. Ecological pressures like habitat loss or resource scarcity can push a species out of its native area.
While factors like better resources, maybe fewer predators, that predator release idea, pull them into a new environment.
Exactly. So the basic dynamic of forces driving movement has a clear parallel.
Okay, what about once they arrive? The paper mentions integration.
Yeah, the idea of ecological integration. That's when a non-native species manages to survive, reproduce, find its niche in the new environment.
And they draw a parallel to human social integration. That feels a bit thin, doesn't it? Human integration involves language, culture, laws, prejudice. It's vastly more complex than an animal finding food.
It absolutely is more complex. And that's precisely the tension the paper explores. They argue the comparison feels available partly because the language itself got tangled up historically.
Ah, you're circling back to the vocabulary issue.
Yes, they point to the Chicago School of Sociology back in the early 20th century.
Right, that old model of urban development.
Exactly. It used ecological terms like invasion and succession to describe how different immigrant groups moved into and supposedly displaced others in city centers.
So that academic language kind of cross-pollinated embedding the metaphor.
Pretty much. It normalized using ecological terms for human social processes, even though the model itself is long outdated. It laid some linguistic groundwork for the confusion we see today.
Okay, that historical context helps. What about feedback loops? Once movement starts, how does it build?
Both fields see similar feedback mechanisms. In ecology, there's the bridgehead effect.
Meaning the first successful invaders make it easier for others.
Yeah. They might alter the environment slightly or just demonstrate viability, paving the way for subsequent introductions. Sometimes it leads to what's called an invasional meltdown, where the whole ecosystem's resistance drops.
And the parallel in human migration.
It's more about information and social networks. Think about successful first-wave migrants sending back positive reports about jobs, safety, community.
That encourages more people from their network, family, or friends to follow.
Right. Success breeds success. It creates a pathway, a kind of social bridgehead that facilitates further migration flows.
The paper highlights one analogy that seems particularly close, involving forced movement.
Yes, that's the comparison between human refugees and the conservation practice of assisted translocation.
Moving endangered species outside their native range to save them.
Exactly. Like moving the Guam kingfisher to predator-free islands because the brown tree snake wiped them out on Guam. In both cases, refugees fleeing conflict, species moved for conservation, you have populations being relocated, often under duress for their protection or for broader societal goals.
And both carry significant risks and require really careful planning.
Absolutely. Deep ethical and practical thought has to go in beforehand because you're moving groups into potentially unfamiliar, stressful situations. The parallel in motive and complexity is quite striking there.
But, okay, here's the pivot point. All these parallels exist, but the paper insists they break down dramatically when we consider the ethics.
Completely.
Yeah.
This is where the comparison becomes not just inaccurate, but actively harmful. The fundamental distinctions are non-negotiable.
Let's spell those out clearly. What's the absolute core difference?
It boils down to rights and ethics. Simply put, humans have inherent rights, individually and collectively. We have culture, agency, moral standing recognized in law and philosophy.
Whereas non-human species, currently at least, don't have that same legal or moral status in our systems.
Right. So managing non-native species often focuses on ecosystem health, biodiversity preservation. This can justify policies like containment, eradication, lethal control, things unthinkable for human populations.
Because human migration policy must be centered on human dignity, rights, well-being, humanitarian concerns. The goals are fundamentally different spheres.
Totally incompatible objectives, really, which leads to the next key difference, conscious agency.
How the movement actually happens.
Exactly. Biological invasions are, almost by definition, human-mediated, but often passive for the organism involved.
Like the snake accidentally hitching a ride in cargo. It didn't choose to invade Guam.
Precisely. Whereas human migration, setting aside refugees and trafficked people for a moment, is overwhelmingly an active, conscious decision made by individuals or families.
Migrants usually have some information, even if it's imperfect, about the destination. They can weigh options, plan, strategize for integration in ways a plant seed or an insect larva simply cannot.
That capacity for foresight and proactive adaptation is a massive difference. Non-human species are essentially passive actors until they either thrive or die in the new environment.
Okay, rights, agency. What about the scale of impact? Politicians often frame even small numbers of migrants as a huge threat.
Yeah, and the paper tackles that directly by comparing reproductive strategies and impact potential. Think about a species with an R strategy.
Like insects or rodents, lots of offspring, fast reproduction, little parental investment.
Right. A very small founding population of such a species can explode rapidly and cause massive, sometimes irreversible ecological damage almost overnight.
You mentioned the emerald ash borer earlier.
Perfect example. A few beetles, likely arriving in wood packaging, have decimated tens of millions of trees across a continent, completely altering forest ecosystems in just a couple of decades.
And the comparison to human migrants.
By contrast, a small number of human migrants simply doesn't have that kind of immediate ecosystem destabilizing potential. The impacts are typically cultural, social, economic. They happen on human timescales, are often manageable, and frequently positive for the receiving society. Framing a few families arriving as an existential ecological style threat is just dishonest.
And finally, there's a basic biological point they make.
Yes, the fact that Homo sapiens is fundamentally a single, globally distributed, cosmopolitan species, we've been moving and adapting across the planet for millennia.
So defining a human as non-native based on crossing a line on a map is a recent political idea, not a deep biological one.
Exactly. Whereas non-native species in biology are defined by crossing natural barriers, oceans, mountains that they couldn't have crossed without human help, the definition itself is different.
Okay, so the comparison is superficial scientifically and uh, deeply problematic ethically. What are the real-world consequences of getting this wrong, especially for policy?
The paper points to two huge dangers stemming from this rhetoric. The first is obvious: dehumanization.
Treating people like pests or plagues.
Yes, it directly fuels xenophobia, makes discrimination seem acceptable, and is used to justify restrictive, often cruel policies that violate human rights norms.
And the second danger.
It's a massive distraction from the root causes of migration.
How so?
By framing migration as an invasion, the focus shifts entirely onto the migrants themselves as the problem. It conveniently ignores the bigger picture, the global inequalities, the histories of colonialism, the ongoing impacts of climate change driven by wealthier nations, the political instability.
It lets powerful nations off the hook for their role in creating the conditions that force people to move.
Precisely. It shifts blame onto the vulnerable and prevents honest discussion about systemic solutions and responsibilities.
Given how toxic the comparison is, should the disciplines just stay separate? Is there any value in invasion scientists and migration scholars talking to each other at all?
Oh, there's definitely value in transdisciplinary work. The paper argues for it, but it has to be done carefully and ethically without the loaded language.
How could invasion science help social science, for instance?
Well, ecological models of spread could, cautiously, help understand things like how diseases move through human populations via travel networks, or tracking the spread of species associated with humans, like specific weeds or rats, can help archaeologists reconstruct ancient trade routes. It offers tools, if used responsibly.
And what about the other way? What can invasion biology learn from social sciences?
Primarily, a history lesson, perhaps. Social sciences, like sociology, grappled with and largely abandoned militaristic, othering language like invasion to describe human groups almost a century ago.
Because it was recognized as misleading and harmful.
Exactly. So social science offers invasion biology a critical lens on its own terminology, words like war on invasives, eradication, control. Maybe it's time for ecologists to consider if that language is always appropriate or helpful, even for non-human species, given its historical baggage.
So the big policy takeaway for anyone listening is maintain a clear separation.
Crystal clear. We need context-specific policies. Biosecurity, managing the movement of goods, plants, animals to prevent unwanted ecological introductions, is a legitimate and vital goal for protecting ecosystems. Think zebra mussels, emerald ash borers.
But immigration policy.
That has to operate in a completely different framework. It must be grounded in human rights, international law, principles of humanitarian aid, social integration, and economic needs. The goals are human dignity and justice, not ecological management. You can't use the same rule book.
It feels like we've really dissected this. We started with this phrase, migrant invasion, often thrown around as a political weapon.
Yeah, scare tactic.
Only defined that the actual science, across multiple fields, demands we keep these concepts rigorously separate. There's an ethical firewall there.
Absolutely. You can't equate the movement of cargo containers with the movement of conscious human beings seeking safety or opportunity. It's fundamentally different.
So integrating knowledge across natural and social sciences can definitely deepen our understanding.
For sure, it enriches the picture.
But only if we respect those ethical boundaries and focus on solutions that are fair and sustainable for everyone involved, people and ecosystems.
Well said. Justice, equity, sustainability, those have to be the guiding principles.
Okay, before we wrap up, a final thought for you, the listener. We touched on the idea of cultural convergence, how globalization and migration might lead cultures to become more similar, sometimes dominated by global trends, like, say, the spread of English or certain consumer brands.
A kind of cultural homogenization.
Right. Now, consider how that process mirrors something ecologists call biotic homogenization. That's when a few highly successful, globally widespread non-native species, think things like pigeons, rats, certain weeds, push out diverse native species, making ecosystems worldwide look more alike.
So you have homogenization happening culturally and biologically, both driven partly by global connectivity.
Exactly. So the question to ponder is, What level of homogenization, whether it's cultural uniformity or biological uniformity, are we actually willing to accept as the price of our interconnected world? Something to think about.
A really interesting parallel to consider.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.